smooth and very, very jazzy. Oh my gosh, I haven't played that song. I really haven't even thought about that song for a long time. That's called Lifeguard Station number 18. That's a small portion of it. And I sat on the beach in Santa Monica, California one night and wrote that with my dulcimer right next to the Santa Monica Pier, and had just discovered this amazing, fun series of chords that created instant jazz whenever you played them. And we'll be talking about today in our fourth of 6, looking at how to build chords and also how to use them. We've already covered the major and the minor chords, the suspended chord, and the dominant 7th. And this week we continue our look at 7th chords with the major 7th and the minor 7th, and we're going to have a lot of fun today. But before I get started, I want to say hello to one of my patrons on Patreon, Dennis Waldrop. Dennis, man, you and Ellen have been a part of my life since I first got on the mountain dulcimer scene back in the day. You know, you guys have been there at the Fort Christmas Jams. You've come down to Key West for the Key West Dulcimer Festival. And it's been great to know you all these years as friends. And also, thank you so much for being a part of my Patreon community. Now, I know that later this month, I'm coming over to your house for a very special engagement on December 12th. So I just want to say out for everybody here, happy 50th anniversary to Dennis and Ellen. Thank you guys so much for all that you've done over the years for Jay and I. Now, for those of you wondering about Patreon and seeing all these dulcimer players with Patreon, Stephen Yielberg, Stephen Seifert, Aaron May, Brett Ridgway, Wendy Songe, all these guys have Patreon. What is it exactly? Well, it's whatever the artist would like it to be. Some people use it for pure educational resources. Some people use it for fundraising. Some people use it as an outreach. And it's all very, very different. And all across the Patreon platform, you've got lots and lots of artists and busy people, creators, who are putting all kinds of real fun stuff out there. So it's just like you never know what to expect when you show up on someone's Patreon. When you come to mine for $5 a month, what you get is unlimited access to all of my downloads from all of my archives, all the CDs I've produced, the books, the tablature, even stuff that's not even in the books, that's just floating out there in the ether. And of course, hours and hours of video, entertainment, and education. Not only that, but every single week I produce new content, including Mailbag Monday, Dulcimerica, and other stuff that just happens to pop up on the radar. It's a busy time. I've been at home. There's nothing else to do but create and share music, and it's an awesome thing. But what's really awesome is that the patrons, every single day, for just $5 a month and up, help so that I can do this. So they literally are part of my art. And every single time I look at a piece of gear they help purchase, or something they help maintain, which is just about every time I turn my head in the studio, I think about my patrons and how they've really stepped up and made it possible for me to continue as a full-time musician. Thank you guys so very, very, very much. If you'd like to join up on Patreon and you want to check out what it all is before you sign up, come on down to patreon.com/bingfutch. Scroll down past the sign-up stuff till you see where all the tags are. Click Open House, and there's a lot of free stuff there for you. If you like what you see, please do consider becoming a patron like Dennis and Ellen. Again, thank you guys, and happy anniversary again. I'm looking forward to playing music for you guys very, very soon. So let's take a look, and we're going to look backwards and do some recap here. You might have jumped into this in the middle, or it might just be good to have a refresher. So we're going to start off with a basic triad. No, let's go back even further than that. Let's take a look at a note. What's interesting about the word note is that you can rearrange the letters to create the word tone, and both of those words do describe what a single note is. That's a note by itself. That's an A right there. And there are 7 different notes in a basic major scale or a minor scale, and there are 12 different notes in the chromatic scale that we choose 7 out of that chromatic scale to become a diatonic scale, which means within the key, 7 notes. But we typically only use a 7-note scale when we're playing music, but there, of course, are options to changing that. So just one note is that. By itself, it is a note. As soon as we get 2 notes, we have what's called an interval, and the interval name describes the relationship between this note and that note. However far away you are from the first note, which is the root note, And then the second note is how far you're going. So the distance between A and D is called a perfect fourth. There's a particular name for each one of the 12 intervals in the chromatic scale. And these intervals are super important because they help us hear the distances between notes inside of melodies, scales, and chords. So the more you know about them, the easier it is to do a lot of the stuff that we're getting into in the second half of this series. Now, as soon as you get 3 notes all together, now you're talking about a full chord, and that's called a triad. It has 3 notes, so something like this. So we've got, first of all, a chord. That's a D major chord. We have D, which is the root. We have F sharp, which is the major third. And then we have A, which is the perfect fifth. And together, they create a D major chord. Now, we can also take 3 notes and make a minor chord. And the difference between a major and a minor chord is what happens with that third note, or the middle note of that. Remember, we compared it to a traffic light. If the root is the green light and the red light on the top is the perfect fifth, then the yellow light is the third. And we can either use a major third or a minor third to create a major or a minor chord. Now remember, we're going to be measuring this from the root. In this case, we're playing D major or D minor, so D is the root. So the distance between D and F sharp is a major third, and that's why we have our happy, dappy major chord. But when we shorten that interval and make it a minor third, we take it down a half step, we now have D, F natural, and A, and we now end up with a minor, a D minor chord. Kind of serious, get down to business kind of a chord. Major chord, minor chord. We can do the same thing with A major. A major, A, C sharp, and E. The distance between A and C sharp is a major third. So here we have A on the bass string, C sharp, the major third on the melody string, E, the perfect fifth on the middle string at the 4th fret. There's our A, C sharp, and E for a major A major chord. So if I take that C sharp down a half step, and remember all of the narrow spaces on our dulcimer are half steps, all the wide spaces are whole steps. So I've got the ability to take that C sharp down a half step to C natural. Now the distance between A and C is a minor third, and that's going to give us the serious A minor chord. A major, A minor. Now I know we didn't talk about it too much, but I've mentioned it a couple of times. There's another chord that we can use here that is the perfect thing for all uses. It's called the 5 chord or root 5 chord, and it's written with a letter and the note name basically, and the number 5 after it. That sounds just like it implies. This chord has the root and it has the fifth, but it doesn't have a third at all. So if I strum open on the mountain dulcimer, we've got D, if I'm tuned D-A-D. I've got D on the bass string. Okay, that's the root. Going to the fifth, that's A. And then going an octave above the D on the melody string. So there are just 2 notes here. If I strum open, that's a D5 chord. That means that anytime I play a bar across all the strings, whatever I'm playing on the bass is going to be the root, and then I can call that a 5 chord. So we have E5, F sharp 5, G5, A5, B5, C5, C sharp 5, and D5 at the octave. D5, all of those types of chords are also known as power chords, and they omit the third, which means you can use them for either major or minor chords. When you don't want to put too fine a point on the chord and want to leave it maybe a little ambiguous, the 5 chord is the way to go. And you could really lump that in with your basic triads. We're just doubling up one of those notes. So that's your major and your minor chord. Now we're going to add to that, and we're going to have some fun with the dominant 7th chord. The dominant 7th chord, we're going to add 1 note to a major chord. So let's say, for example, we're going to do an A7. That would be written A with the number 7 next to it. The dominant 7th is a mysterious chord, and it does lots of beautiful things when you include it in your chord progressions. So let's go with A major first of all. Okay, so we have A, C sharp, and E, root, third, and fifth. So if you're playing basically a 3-string chorus instrument, how are you supposed to play a 4-note chord? Basically, you can drop one of the other notes out and just play 3 of those notes. And the note we're going to drop, believe it or not, is going to be A, the root. I'm going to take my thumb and move it from the 4th fret down to the 3rd fret to play G. Now, how do we come up with that? Well, first we start off with A. We've built our A major chord, A, C sharp, and E. And relative to the A major scale, you really want to think about that 7th scale degree. Remember, all of our scale notes have numbers, 1 through 7 assigned to them, and those are their respective scale degrees. What we're looking for a dominant 7th chord is a major chord, root, major 3rd, and perfect 5th, with a flat 7th or a minor 7th interval. To get that, we just go to the 7th note of the scale, which is G sharp in the key of A, and then we take that 7th note down a half step to G natural. So if I add G natural to my C sharp and E, now I've got an A7 chord, which is a quizzical sounding thing, but it's very, very important. There's a couple of things happening inside of this. One of the things that's happening is we've got an interval called a tritone inside of this chord. It's kind of creepy sounding a little bit, just, on its own. But when you wrap it up together, it does a lot of really neat stuff. Also, when you build a dominant 7th chord, naturally occurring in every key built off the 5th scale degree, what happens is you now have the leading tone of that key, which is A major, if we're thinking about A major chord. You have the leading tone built into the chord itself, and the leading tone loves to resolve up a half step or down a half step, which means that the dominant 7th chord sounds super cool when you're going down to D major, the root. So let's go ahead and do that. Wow, that is such closure. We've got tension, and then we've got release. Beautiful thing. And notice that with those notes, notice that C sharp came up a half step to D, and notice that G goes down a half step to F sharp. And that's the kind of magic that we're looking for when we start to put the 7th chord into chord progressions. Whenever we can get that half step lift up or that half step fall down, in both directions, it really sounds great. Look at this D7 chord going to G major. Wow, beautiful stuff. Notice that I'm using the 1.5 fret here. Notice that once again, F sharp moves up to G a half step, and then C goes down to B a half step. So you want to use that dominant 7th chord as a kiss on the cheek of the chord you're playing, and then it's going to give you this nice tension and resolution as we move on. And so we spent a lot of time looking at the dominant 7th chord last week, but there are other 7th chords, as I mentioned, and these two have a really nice quality to them, and they're not hard to build and they're not hard to use. We're talking about the major 7th and the minor 7th, and once again, these are both chords that have 4 notes inside of them. We haven't quite gotten into extended chords yet, which are going to be notes that we're adding from outside of the octave, like 9 chords, 11th chords, and 13th chords. We're going to save that for another series, I think, but it's good to know that this is what can happen. We can keep stacking these, and it's a lot of fun. So before we get any further with this, I want to take you back to how we do our chord building using our handy dandy scale. So we're going to be doing all this stuff in the key of D major. So we've got the D major scale up on the screen. We've got D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, and C sharp. And each one of those notes is associated with a number 1 through 7. So what we're going to do is we're going to build chords. We're going to harmonize the scale harmonization. And we're going to harmonize the scale, and we are going to develop chords, a stack of 3 notes off of every single one of these. Now, if you build off of the 1st, 4th, and 5th notes of the scale, you'll end up with major chords. If you build off of the second, third, and sixth notes of the scale, you'll end up with minor chords. And if you build off the seventh scale degree, you will end up with a diminished chord. And we'll be talking about the diminished chord in our very final episode of this series. That and its little cousin, the augmented chord. So knowing that, we're going to use this ability now to hop, skip, and jump, starting with D. If you start with D and you want to find out what the ingredients are of a D major chord, simply go start with D, then hop over that next note. Just pretend it doesn't exist and land on the note after it and bring that note into the chord, F sharp. Now hop over G. Not going to happen for the D major chord. And then land on A. Add that. So we have D, F sharp, and A. We can do the same thing with E minor. We can go E, skip F sharp, go to G, skip A, go to B, and we end up with E minor. And we can just keep doing that. Now this scale does wrap around, so if we want to build that diminished chord, we can start with C sharp, skip D, go to E, skip F sharp, go to G, and we have our C sharp diminished. So you can do this with any scale without having to memorize a whole bunch of chord books and charts and stuff like that. Just write out the 7 notes of the scale and then hop, skip, and jump to create your triads, your major, your minor, and your 7th chord. Now here's the fun part. We can continue to hop, skip, and jump beyond 3 positions in order to get our 4-note chords. So as I mentioned earlier, the dominant 7th chord, you can build that naturally by starting from the 5th scale degree, which is going to be A. We go A, skip, go to C sharp, skip, go to E, skip again, and G. That gives you the ingredients for the dominant 7th chord. It actually happens naturally, organically, if you will, inside of the D major scale. But now we're going to look at the other ones that we can play with. How are we going to get these major 7ths and minor 7ths? And first of all, what are they? A major 7th chord is a major chord with a 7th scale degree, not flattened 7th like the dominant 7th, but the normal 7th note of the associated scale. So if we were to take a look at a D major 7 chord, we'd have D, F sharp, A, C sharp, as opposed to D, F sharp, A, C natural for a dominant 7th or D7. This would be written D, M, A, J, 7 to let us know that we're specifically talking about a major 7 chord. If you see just the 7, it's assumed that you are talking about the dominant 7th chord. So you have to very much specify M, A, J, 7, that we're going to use the 7th scale degree or the major 7th interval added to our major chord. Same thing applies here when we're playing these chords on a 3-note course instrument. Just going to drop out one of those other notes. As I mentioned prior in episodes in the past here, if you're going to drop something out of a 4-note chord, you want to drop the thing that's not being altered. You can drop the root, because we don't tend to really alter the root. We move it around a lot, but we don't really alter it. And you can omit the 5th. There are times when we do change the 5th. We either diminish it or augment that 5th, raise it up or bring it down a half step. But we don't do it a whole bunch, which means here, especially in the case of major, minor, and different types of 7th chords, the 5 isn't as important, so we can drop that out of there. What you don't want to get rid of is your flat third, or your 3rd rather, or your 7th. Because it's the 3rd that we alter to make the difference between a major chord and a minor chord. And it's the 7th we alter to get the difference between a dominant 7th and a major 7th chord. So whatever you do, try and hang on to the 3 and the 7, because it's the relationship, the interval between those 2 notes, that's going to make a big difference on how your chord is actually going to sound. So in the case of D major 7 chord, we can actually simply play 0, 2, 2. Smooth jazz. That's kind of cool, isn't it? So we have our C sharp right there on the middle string, and that's the 7 we're bringing in. We have our F sharp there, that's our major 3rd. We want those 2 elements for sure. And then we have a nice big root on the bass string open. So there are a couple of different chord shapes I'm going to show you for that. Now the minor 7th chord is a minor chord, as you might imagine, and it has a flatted 7th note. And that's got a whole different sound to it. It's still jazzy, but it's also kind of a little bit mournful, if you will. Here's a good example. Here's another one. Mysterious. You know, if a minor chord can sort of have an edge to it, by adding a flat 7th to it and making it a minor 7th chord, you can actually take the edge off a little bit and really smooth things out. It actually blurs the differences between the major and the minor chord, and that's what makes them sort of laid back, jazzy, easy going. So let me show you a couple different chord shapes here. And first, before we do that, let's go ahead and look at the hop, skip, and jump technique for each of these chords, starting with the major 7. So once again, we're going to build from D. So we go D, we're going to hop over E, go to F sharp, hop over G, go to A, hop over B, and go to C sharp. Now we have our 4 notes for that. Let's build our major 7th chords for all of our major chords. So that's going to be 1, 4, and 5, right? Let's go ahead and start from the 4th scale degree, that's G. So we're going to go G, hop over A, get B, hop over C sharp, get D, hop over E, grab F sharp, and there you have G, B, D, F sharp. That's going to give us a G major 7 chord. Yum, yum. Let's do the same thing with A. Now, this is not naturally occurring for us because remember, A is going to give us the dominant 7th. So if we go A, C sharp, E, G, that's dominant 7th. But if we raise the G to G sharp, now we've got an A major 7th because we're using the distance from the root, A, to that 7th, which is going to be the major 7th interval. That's going to give us an A major 7th chord with G sharp. And we can do that by playing up here. Good stuff, good stuff. All right, so we've built off of the 1st, 4th, and 5th scale degrees, made a small alteration on the 5. Now let's do the same thing with the minors, starting with the 2nd scale degree, that's E. We're going to build an E minor 7th chord. E, skip F sharp, go to G. Skip A, go to B. Skip C sharp, go to D. And we end up with our E minor 7th chord. Let's move on to our 3rd scale degree, that's F sharp. We'll go F sharp, skip G, go to A. Skip B, go to C sharp. Skip D, go to E. And now we've got our F sharp minor chord. All right, let's go to the 6th scale degree. That's B minor, starting with B. Hop over C sharp, go to D. Hop over E, go to F sharp. Hop over G, grab A. And for our 4-note chord, that is a B minor 7th chord. Now, the deal with our C sharp diminished chord is, once again, it's a matter of including the right notes. A diminished chord, as we'll find out a bit more in episode 6 of this series, is a minor chord with a diminished 5th. The 5th, the perfect 5th, is actually brought down a half step. It's a weird sounding chord. And that's going to end up giving us a crazy chord called a C sharp half diminished 7th. Yeah, I know. But it's a different voicing and it sounds really cool. But it's not much different from the diminished chord that we already have. So we'll save that for another time, talking about our half diminished 7th chord and also the full diminished 7th chord and the next or the last in this series. All right, so we know how to build these things. Let's talk about these chord shapes. And this is really the easiest way to go about it. What I've discovered about playing these chords on the mountain dulcimer is that you really need to have that root there. Otherwise, it just doesn't sound right. We need to have a nice, your lowest pitch note in the chord needs to be there, and then we're going to add these other elements here. So let's take a look at what we've got here with the first chord shape. And I'm going to use the major 7, G major 7 for this. I call this the OK chord shape because when you're playing it, it looks like you're going okay. You're going to grab the root with your ring finger or pinky finger, whichever one is going to be working better for you. And then you're going to go up 2 frets. So first of all, we're going to start G on the bass string. I like using my pinky actually. And then I'm going to put my index finger at the 5th fret middle string, thumb on the 5th fret melody string. Okay. And that shape is going to give you a major 7th chord in the appropriate spots up and down the fretboard. So let's do that. Let's move it up like this to A, and we're going to allow for this half step here, because if we were to play that, we would actually be playing minor, but we can still do that. I'll show you that in a second here. And so here we go. I got my root A on the 4th fret, and then 6.5 on the middle, 6.5 on the melody. And there is our A major 7 chord. As we found out, we can do this simply, open 2 and 2. For D major, we don't have to do the OK nearly as much because we don't have to fret the open D. That's being done for us already. Now there are places where this configuration of fingers, this shape, the OK, will give you a minor 7th chord. In the case of A minor, we're going to go from the bass, the root on A, and come up to the 6th fret instead. So we can do the OK chord shape. I just made that up this morning because I don't know what else to call it. We can do that. We can also come down to F sharp and do our F sharp minor by doing this same shape. And we can come down to E on the bass string and then come to the 3rd fret across on the middle in the melody and get our E minor. And then we can come up here to the B on the bass string and then 7th fret for the rest for our B minor 7th. That is the OK chord shape. And if you maintain that and get used to holding your hand like that, you can get smooth jazz up and down the fretboard. That one's not too hard. The next one I'm going to show you is not incredibly fun when you first start doing it, and I call it the W. Again, the most important thing here really is you really want to have that root as your lowest pitch note. Otherwise, these chords sort of turn into other chords, and we'll talk about that on another show as well. But this particular, I call it the W. And so let me play a G major 7 chord for you and show how I'm building it. First of all, I've got my index finger on the root. That's going to be G. I'm going to build it this way. Instead of building from the root and going 2 frets up, we're going to start from the root and we're going to start moving down. So next is going to be my middle finger. We're going to hit that melody string. It already is feeling a little funky, probably. And then the ring finger is going to come up and grab at the 1st fret on the middle string. This is why I call it the W, because it just looks like you're making a W. I was going to call it the Spider-Man or the web slinger, because when he slings his webs, he does this little thing, kind of thing. I figured that was a little, I don't know. The W is a lot more obvious, I think, and we'll stick to those types of descriptions. So here's a G major 7th chord. Admittedly, it's not the easiest chord shape to slide into very quickly, but the more you do it, the more you're going to find yourself using this. I use G7 like this, G major 7 a lot. And if you've got another half step down below, you can always move that down there and pick up your minor 7th interval and get your dominant 7th. So you can hear right here the difference between your dominant 7th and the major 7th. One's really edgy, and the other one is kind of laid back and not edgy. And that's a really easy way to remember those 2 different types of chords there. So yeah, we can just find our root. Let's do B minor 7th. We're going to start with our root. We're going to go to our next fret down and hit the melody string, and then the next fret down and grab the middle string. Now these are really pretty voicings. I like the W for that. But if it's just giving you heartburn to try and play it and cramping your style, then you can always go the other direction and do the okay. And so that's going to work all over the place. But sometimes, like right here, and also right here, you're going to get a dominant seventh chord, and hopefully you were able to recognize that. So not every single time you put your fingers down will you get either a minor seventh or major seventh chord. Sometimes you will get a dominant seventh using that configuration, using that chord shape. But everywhere else we get C major 7. That's nice, isn't it? We can do, with our OK, we can do F major 7. Those two next to each other are really pretty. Isn't that nice? You know, back in the day when I first started playing, back in the we used to take our double melody string and tune it a fifth apart. And that gave you all of these combined with your middle and your bass string, all these really cool major seventh and minor seventh chords. But that was on the melody string. It took away your ability to play melody on that course. This doesn't require any retuning at all. It just requires a couple of new chord shapes that you can use and hopefully work into your vocabulary and bring these things out. So that's how we're building the major seventh chords, the minor seventh chords. Now that we know how to build them, what the heck do you do with them? Because they're a little on the outside. They could be a little ambiguous. There is tension, but there's also not as much tension. It kind of blurs the edges of the definitions we had set before. So let's take a look at this. Let's look at a basic chord progression. Let's go 1, 4, 5, 6, 3, 4, 5, 1. That's a kind of a meandering way to get from the root, go on our little adventure, and then come on back home to the root. So for the case of D major, that would be D as the 1, G as the 4 chord, A as the 5 chord, B minor is the 6, F sharp minor is the 3, then back to G, A, and then finally home. And that would sound like this. Of course, if I hit all the strings, it'll sound like this. It'll sound like this. Basic journey, we're painting with primary colors, red, green, and blue. The vanilla chords, everybody uses them. They're very simple, nothing tricky about them, and it sounds very nice. Now, let's do some stuff here. Let's first of all make major sevenths and minor sevenths on each of the major and minor chords. So we're going to play a D major 7 to start off. Then we're going to go to a G major 7. Then we'll go A major 7. Then we're just going to play a B minor, nothing fancy, kind of pull us back into a more simpler mindset. Then we're going to go to a F sharp minor 7, kick us back into that jazzy groove. And then we'll do our G major 7, our A major 7, and then we'll resolve that down to the root, to the home, which is D. And here's how that's going to sound. Very different, huh? Way, way different. And there's just so much you can do playing around with these chords, going back and forth. You know, one of them in particular is going from the 2 to the dominant chord, which is the 5. So if you were to say, let's do E minor, and we're going to move that to 5. And you got a nice little loop. You can kind of go back and forth with these two. And just a little bit more interesting than just simply going E minor to A. Subtle difference, you know, to kind of, again, once again, kind of soften those edges a little bit. Again, I was talking about in earlier episodes here that we're not just moving chords, we're actually moving the individual notes. And when we use these different chord shapes, you know, not just our basic shapes, but also inverting those all over the fretboard, we're rearranging the lights in the traffic signal. So that green light will sometimes end up on the top or in the middle, and that red light will sometimes end up on the bottom. And that changes the nature of the chord just a little bit. So by nature of that, these notes are going to move in different directions for their resolution. Some may go up, some may go down. And that's where you get a lot of your really interesting movements in between chords. Take a look at this one here. It's sort of based off this great tune by John Denver called Dreams. And it goes like this. We're just going to move up from... how that goes from that D major 7 chord to a D7 dominant 7th chord, and then we're going to resolve it to a G. Check this out. Let me just do this walk down again. Oh man, that's nice. And the only thing I would really want right now is a 0 half fret that would give me E flat, B flat, and E flat, because that would give me the ability to play a G minor chord, a minor 4, which is kind of hard to do on the mountain dulcimer if you don't have the 8.5 fret. But man, all we're doing here is we're tracking this movement that starts here and chromatically would work its way down. C sharp, C natural, to B flat, if we had that right there. So it'd be like a... Dum bum, that B flat would come in down there. Ba-dum. Back to D. Real nice, huh? So a lot of times it's not even really about moving the whole chord. It's moving one or two elements inside the chord and creating motion, creating tension, and then getting that release. And that, I hope, is going to be the next series when we get deeper into moving our chords around. Also, you'll notice how I could sing the B flat and play a bar at the 3rd fret, our G5 chord, and that extra minor 3rd came in and it fit wonderfully. So if you don't have a chord sometimes, if you're playing with somebody and they say, can you play B major? We can't, but we can bar at the 5th fret and play B5, and somebody else can handle the note that we're missing. So just to recap a little bit, we've got major 7th chords, which is a major chord with a major 7th interval added to it. And then we also have minor 7th chords, which is a minor chord that has a flat 7th or a minor 7th interval added to it. And both of these chords are very smooth, they're very jazzy, and they add lovely color and soften some of the edges of the primary colors. So you're starting to get away from red, green, and blue and starting to get into some you know, some mauve and some, what's the word I'm looking for? Looking for some pastel colors, you know, to kind of soften things up, blur out things a little bit, and just add more dimension and dynamics to your music. I hope you've enjoyed this. There's a lot more where this came from, of course, on Patreon, where I often post some review guides and charts that help you to understand about the Dulcimerica episodes a little more. As well, there's also Dulcimerica Deluxe, which basically are shorter episodes that take one subject, focus on it with a laser intensity to help you really get to the bottom of music theory as it pertains to the mountain dulcimer. Next week, we're going to be looking at the major 6 chord. It's a lot of fun. It's not nearly as crazy as all that, and we'll have some fun flipping it around to see what else it can do. Until then, everybody, we'll see you next time.